Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Alright, so this show is going to be blisteringly quick. It's going to be absolutely fast. Let me check my mic before I put my running shoes on. My wife and I have something to attend to today in physical matter reality life that goes beyond the confines of this digital space. So, we need to leave shortly. That being said, there's a video that I want to show. There are two videos that I want to show. Let's hop back across the pond. I know I've been spending a lot of time across the pond. It's funny. As a quick aside, my wife and I are talking about traveling from place to place to place into various countries. Now, this is something I've always wanted to do. I went traveling. I've been to multiple countries doing this. When I was much younger, no, not much younger, maybe 10 years ago, I was with a woman whose job center was Australia. I had never been out the country, and I went to visit her in Australia for her birthday. Now, this turned out magnificently bad because we got into screaming matches walking. I've never screamed at anybody in my life. And we were in these major arguments with screaming matches as we were walking through Sydney, Australia. It was a fucking horrible scenario. But that being said, I met this British guy who was there, and he opened my eyes to something that I had never been aware of, even though it was perfectly available and right there to me. He traveled. He went from place to place to place to place. He had his ex-wife to take care of the house, and he just went skipping about all these different places in South America, North America, and in this case, I think he was in Australia. When I got back home to the States, a few things happened. Her and I broke up. that definitely took place. That should have taken place a while prior. I booked the open ticket to Amsterdam, and I just went. I jumped to Amsterdam, Egypt. I went up and down through Egypt into Israel, into areas that would be considered Palestine. I went into Jordan. Took a flight from Jordan to Nepal, from Nepal to India. Eventually, I was able to make my way back around to go to France, London, Ireland, Scotland, Ecuador. Yeah, I've been to a few places. Panama. Yeah, I've been to a few places. I love to travel. So, Greece, Italy, Iceland. We got married in Iceland. There was somewhere else. Greece, Italy, Spain. Yeah, that may be all of them. I feel like I'm missing some. That may be all of them. I love to travel. I love being in places, completely different culture, and I don't understand what the language is, and yet you still figure it out, and you still can interact with human beings in their own habitable space. And you realize as you're doing this, how close and how similar human beings are. It's fucking amazing. There may be small permutations in the culture and everything else, but a smile is a smile depending on, no matter where you go. A cry is a cry depending on where you go. People love their kids no matter where you go. They feel pain, they feel misery, they feel happiness, they feel sorrow. They're human beings no matter where you go. Anywhere you go, you're right where you are. So this has gotten off to a bad start because I'm way in the weeds. I want to show two videos. We're back across the pond. One is by John Pilger. I showed this in my last video, but I showed this towards the end. I want to show it in the beginning. And the other one is the ex-mayor of London. Now, you've been hearing the government's line on this, the stenographers, and I've made just one very simple point. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Governments lie, and you should be very skeptical of the things that your government says. You shouldn't necessarily just take what the government's saying as the word of God. You should look for evidence. They should be able to provide evidence. They made a major accusation. They should be able to back up that accusation with evidence from transparently, from an international standpoint. Not Theresa May screeching and howling that Russia is somehow responsible for something. They need to make their case. They haven't made their case. They haven't made any case at all. They sent a letter telling them to admit. It's like Spanish Inquisition. Confess! Confess your sins, sir. What is a government supposed to do with this? The United States has mass hysteria going on with Russia, talking about Russia colluded with Trump in the election. After 2 years of hysterical rhetoric by the press and by Democrats, they found Twitter trolls, Facebook ads, and Twitter ads, more than half of which happened after the election, and none of which were saying anything that the candidates themselves weren't already saying. It was bogus. Absolutely bogus. And yet, it in no way tamped down the hysteria. Like I said, you had one guy accusing one of the Republicans as being a Russian agent. Like, this is fucking absurd. But that's the hysteria. Now, they do this because they're trying to obfuscate from a populist uprising that's taking place on the left and the right in American politics. Same thing in the UK. I've made that point. Theresa May is a weak prime minister that is confronted with various problems, one of which is a populist revolt, meaning how popular Jeremy Corbyn is and Labour is in this country. And they understand that they're going to lose the reins of power. They get that. They understand it on a visceral level. And they are trying to find a way to obfuscate from that particular issue. They have the issue with Ireland, meaning, how are you going to solve the hard border? Hey, Theresa May, how are you going to solve the hard border? Don't give me a platitude. Explain to me in detail, how are you going to solve the Irish border issue? They are presented with problems that they in no way can solve. And out of the blue, just so happens, in the same way that America's with this Russia hysteria, it is all of a sudden migrated to Britain, where now Britain is trying to get their own version of Russia hysteria. Part of the reason that I'm skeptical of this is because the point of this was not the investigation. They immediately accused Russia and pivoted from that, assuming, going with the full-on assumption that Russia did it, into accusations and penalties, and coming together with the rest of the world in order to start up this new Cold War, which, if we're being honest, had already been started. Investigate what's taking place. Be skeptical of what your government says. Let's take a listen to Pilger and the ex-mayor. The first one is going to be Pilger.
By John Pilger, Australian journalist and documentary filmmaker. Great to have you on the programme, sir. We've heard the UK police make a statement. The investigation's still very much active. It's going to take some time. No suspects named as of yet. British politicians, they've placed the blame squarely on Russia there, haven't they? No questions asked. Do you think this has been preemptive?
Well, no. I mean, you have to stand back from all of this. This is a carefully constructed drama as part of the propaganda campaign that has been building now for several years in order to justify the actions of NATO, Britain, the United States towards Russia. That's a fact. Russia is ringed by missiles. It has NATO right up on its western border. This is unprecedented since the Second World War. Most people in Britain, most people in the United States don't understand these dangers, the dangers of this propaganda. Now, this drama about whether or not...
By the way, I'm not going to inject a lot on this because I've already shown this video, but one part of this that needs to be nailed down as hard as it can possibly be nailed down. This is profoundly dangerous. I've said this early on when they started doing this Russia nonsense like 2 years ago. I was making this point of how dangerous this is. You've tilted a nation to be these kind of maniacs, giving this perspective of Russians as if Russians is one person. Russia is not one person. Russia is an entire country. There are multiple people in Russia. Taking the perspective that we've been taking, denigrating Russians as a whole in this kind of xenophobic language, based on what they're considered to be Facebook and Twitter ads. They're positioning us in this kind of hostile way, this new McCarthyism, over what they're considered to be Facebook and Twitter ads. That's all they've shown up to this point. We've done extraordinarily worse. We have no moral standing to make the arguments that we're making here with this stuff. In the UK case, it's slightly different. You guys have a chemical weapons factory just a few blocks away or just nearby the place where that spy goes down. Now, the media itself doesn't ask these questions. They have used chemical weapons on British citizens, including in the London Tube. The media doesn't ask these questions at all of the government. It looks like you guys will be far more skeptical than what you already are. I'm not saying Russia didn't do it. I'm not saying Theresa May did it. I'm not saying any of these people did it. I'm saying that we don't know. I'm saying there hasn't been an investigation. And I'm also saying that you should not exclude the British government for potential culpability in what's taken place. Governments lie. Governments do things in order to advance particular perspectives. Is it possible that the United States has something to do with it? Maybe. Is it possible that the UK has something to do with it? Maybe. Is it possible that Russia has something to do with it? Maybe. I don't know. That's why you have an investigation. And you should not exclude the British government from that particular investigation. That's the only point I'm making here. Governments lie to advance particular objectives. Be skeptical of your government. That is all I ask. Let's keep going. It's a little bit more with Pilger.
Serge Skripal was poisoned by Novichok. For one thing, it's up to the British government to supply evidence that even the most basic prima facie evidence, prima facie case that Russia was in any way responsible for this. Russia's nerve gas program, its Novichok, active Novichok program, was verified as destroyed in September 2013 by the United Nations watchdog. Unlike the United States, that is still to be destroyed. Porton Down, a few miles from where Skripal and his daughter were found, has a long and sinister record with nerve gas and chemical weapons. In 2015, The Independent in Britain disclosed that Porton Down was behind the experimentation. The government had experimented on British citizens with nerve gas agents, including on the London Tube. Going back to 1942, the British government had to pay compensation, had to decontaminate Gurlad Island, which it contaminated. The whole role of Porton Down has been integral to the Cold War apparatus of this, and I'm only stating that. I'm only stating that is that there is no evidence, and this is so dangerous with Russia being effectively pushed into a corner with these accusations. It's part of a propaganda campaign. I can tell you that. I'm a journalist who spent almost all my career working in the mainstream in Britain. This is a propaganda campaign promoted specifically in the media and in the government.
If I can just interrupt, Mr. Pilger, I want to get as many questions as I can. And I mean, if we can get back to the sort of question at hand here, I mean, Prime Minister Theresa May said it's highly likely that Russia was involved in some way in this, certainly some strong circumstantial evidence at least. I mean, are you ruling that out entirely as a possibility, any Russian involvement in this?
Well, there's no evidence that Russia is highly likely. Novichok, we don't even know if the Novichok program even existed. Russia's request for a sample of this nerve agent has been turned down. The British police have made no commentary on this. This is extraordinary. You have an attempted murder, you have a crime scene, and you have no evidence. But you have, and neither do you have a motive. Why on earth would Russia, on the eve of an election and on the eve of staging the World Football Cup, want to destroy, if you like, its international name with?
All right, so he's making a good point. Why would Russia do this? Now, the reporter asked him something basic and straightforward, and he didn't necessarily answer the question because there was no way for him to answer the question. are you completely discounting that Russia could have had something to do with this? Now, I personally don't discount that. It is possible. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. Have we presented evidence to show it? No, they have not. Have they given Russia evidence to show? No, they have not. We only have Theresa May's word. It's funny, somebody made the point that Colin Powell at least went down to the UN with a vow of ridiculousness. Theresa May just sent a letter telling them to confess. You guys are guilty, confess. Are you going to show us evidence? No. No. No, we're not. You just have to take my word for it. Apparently, she's supposed to, or Britain is supposed to give this stuff over to an international committee at some point where they're supposed to look at it. But look, he's asking decent questions. How do we know that they had a Novichok program? How do we know that this chemical is Novichok? How are you connecting it to Russia in the first place? Do you yourself have a chemical weapons manufacturing center? Is it possible that your chemicals have gotten loose? How do we know that it wasn't the United States working with the CIA in order to create some kind of pretext for this kind of involvement with Russia? How do we know? How do we know? How do we know? How do we know any of these things? Like all of these things are questions. None of these things have been answered. They jumped immediately to Russia did it. The media and your political apparatus is doing this. It takes or behoves the citizen to be a little bit more thorough, I guess, in their questioning and in their assumptions, in that not necessarily making those assumptions that the government is making, and asking the question of why is the government making these assumptions in this way, and why does the government not wait to an investigation before blaming the other party in this? Asking questions. Question everything. I want to show the mayor real quick before we head out. This is Ken Livingstone, ex-mayor. I may not show the entirety of this.
So we have 23 Russian diplomats who will be expelled from Britain. They have 1 week to leave. What do you make of the measure?
Well, we are at the beginning of our local election campaign, and the Tory party is very far behind in the polls. So I think the way this has been exploited in the media, endless coverage of our Prime Minister taking this strong and stable stand up against Putin and Russia, may very well, this may be a big part of it. But I just have to tell you, I mean, it could turn out all this is true. The trouble is, we've been lied to all my life. And with the passage of 20 or 30 years, the truth eventually comes out. I can remember back in 1964 when America started bombing North Vietnam, we were told it was because the Vietnamese had attacked an American battleship. 20 years later, we were told that wasn't true.
Now, notice what he's saying, because what he's saying is kind of the point that I made. And the reason why I make the point in this way, and I don't make this point to say definitively Theresa May is doing this. That's not why I make the point. I make the point to explain the precedent. The moment that you establish the precedent that these things take place, how you look at the world has to be with a certain amount of skepticism, because you have to accept, just as a human being, that you don't know. This stuff is ambiguous. Governments have lied to me in the past. Government have lied to me in the past on multiple occasions. So, yes, I am going to be skeptical. I'm making this video because I kind of want to drill this point home of your government has lied to you on multiple occasions. Governments lie. Their interest is not the same thing as your interests. And oftentimes, if you set the precedent, if you can show the precedent, if you can show multiple occasions where the government has said and done things that were unscrupulous, that was grossly immoral, and yet they did those things either to their own population or to other populations, then you've set the precedent. I don't understand why the media doesn't understand that the precedent exists, in which case interacting with government in the world in a little bit more skeptical way. For whatever reason, they do not. That is why I'm here. Let's take a look at Ken Livingstone. Let's let him finish.
So literally, politics is a dirty old game, and I think the simple way this has been a mad rush to make all these decisions, we should be waiting for the full police inquiry to come up with a report. It could very well be that Russia has no involvement in this. It could be a rogue Russian agent was behind it. But you have to ask one thing. If Russia wanted to kill this man, they could have killed him when he was a prisoner in Russia. Why have they waited this long? And why use a chemical weapon that makes it look definitely as though Russia's behind this? So many simpler, easier ways of killing someone without leaving all these fingerprints all over.
That's the other thing. You would have to... I don't believe that other countries aren't as incompetent as we try to make those other countries seem. They try to make Kim Jong-un seem like an absolute maniac. Kim Jong-un is protecting his own power base. Like anybody else who is in a particular power position, he's trying to protect his own power position. He believes that a nuclear weapon will protect his power position, in which case he's not crazy, he's not a maniac, he's a person acting as any other person to protect themselves. Vietnam. They weren't crazy, they weren't insane, they were trying to protect their homeland from what was United States aggression into that particular country. Like, I'm trying to get across to you that oftentimes the perspective that you're given of the world is purely from the perspective of that particular country. They don't necessarily look from the perspective of other countries. From Vietnam's perspective, the United States was essentially working as an arm of France, or working in coordination with France. France was brutal in the way that they handled the Vietnamese. They thought America was going to be the same way, in which case they resisted and fought back. They didn't want another colonizing force on their territory. Now, the United States never even looked or bothered to understand that disposition or that position. It was only years after the war where they came back and actually McNamara was like, is that what you guys thought? A fucking conversation might have settled that particular conflict. Probably not, because the United States wanted to be in that territory. But nevertheless, the point I'm making here is skepticism is a good thing. Skepticism is not a bad thing, especially when they're trying to inch you closer and closer into a conflict. Be skeptical. I try to establish precedent. Let's let them keep going.
Right.
Absolutely. And there are so many unanswered questions with this case so far. And the investigation, as you said, is still ongoing.
Oh, I know what I was saying. Incompetence. These guys are not as incompetent as we try to make them seem. Russians supposedly hack into a system and then leave Russian alphabets in the system that can be traced back. Are you telling me they had all the awareness and skills and powers to hack into systems and dip and dodge into these files, but did not have the competence or capability of not leaving Russian initials behind in order to leave a fingerprint that points back to Russia? We know the CIA has the capacity to leave fingerprints of other nations. Yes, you can leave a fingerprint or a signature that makes it look like somebody else did it. Same thing here. How do we know that that chemical is distinctly Russian? And why do we believe that there's nobody else around the globe that has capacity to make that particular chemical? And why on earth would Russia use a particular chemical or something that could be directly traced back to them? We would have to believe that they are magnificently incompetent in doing something in a way that they would clearly wanted to have been caught. Now, one or two things is true. They clearly wanted to be caught, or somebody wanted it to look like Russia. Now, the point I'm making here is we don't know which. Is it possible somebody was incompetent and they were Russian? Yes. Is it possible that somebody wanted to make it look like it was Russian? Yes. Both are possibilities, and both need to be investigated and challenged. I'm not making a defense in this case for Russia. I'm making this point of, if you're going to make a step closer to war, then you need to nail down the actual reality of events. And yes, as the citizenry, you can't necessarily take your government's word for it. I'm sorry that that's the place that we are, but clearly governments lie. What is their motive? Why would they leave evidence in this way? Is there a better way for them to have done this? Could they have done this in a way and got away with it? All these are questions. All of these are good questions that should be asked. Let's keep going.
Given that, don't you feel the measures are premature?
I think they are, and I think we've had over these last few years a sort of paranoia in Europe about President Putin and his strong defence of Russian interests. Every country defends its own interests. When we had the situation in the Crimea, virtually no one on the British media was told that Crimea had been a part of Russia for centuries. It was overwhelmingly filled with Russians, and it was only when the then President Khrushchev back in the mid-1950s changed the boundary that it came under Ukrainian control. And no one was told about this. I mean, I've never seen any British media reporting in detail about the predominance of Russians in the Crimea. And of course, at the time, the Ukrainian government was taking some very unpleasant measures. And frankly, I can well understand that Russians in Crimea don't wish to be under the control of the Ukrainian government. They would rather be under the control of the Russian government.
Theresa May also pointed out that MPs and members of the royal family will not be attending the FIFA World Cup in Russia this summer. What kind of impact, if any, will that have, or is it simply symbolic?
Well, there's absolutely no impact at all. If Theresa May was serious about taking action against Russia, you'd be looking at a big ramping up of economic sanctions. But of course that would damage the West as well. I mean, trade is important between Russia and the rest of Europe and so on. So I have a feeling a lot of this is about trying to build up the image of Theresa May, who did very badly in the last general election. And this is trying to create the impression here we have this strong, stable leader who can defend our interests. But the simple fact is, nothing good is going to come out of this.
Agreed. Like, I keep saying this. These type of situations are used to attack the left. There's a populist revolt. And just so happens, dealing with this populist revolt, oh my God, we have all of a sudden an enemy that we need to deal with. We have an enemy that we need to deal with. Now, this puts the left in a position of having to hold their values. Meaning, again, when people get animated, people get hysterical, they're not necessarily the most rational thing in the world. Human beings, when they're trying to be rational in this situation, can be made to appear weak. I'm being strong. I'm being boisterous. I'm being powerful. Look at me in this awesome fucking blazer of Theresa May. She's a weak prime minister. Her party is not favored in the least. If there was an election today, Jeremy Corbyn would be the prime minister of Britain, of the UK. She has multiple problems that she needs to deal with. Brexit being one of them, being one of the most major ones. And understand that is a threat to her prime ministership. She's only the prime minister because of the DUP. If she takes a position that goes against the DUP, they may pull their support. This is a threat to her prime ministership. What do you do? What do you do? You need to keep power. You need to keep Britain from focusing on these other issues that are affecting Britain. You see across the pond in the United States that Hillary Clinton has done that to magnificent effect and has created this mass hysteria in the United States over Facebook and Twitter ads. What do you do? What do you do? Assume for the moment that's not Theresa May. Assume for the moment there are other elements that want to create this kind of new Cold War hysteria, this Cold War atmosphere, and they're looking for ways to create pretexts to go against Russia. You can't say that it's not possible because it's something that has happened multiple times throughout historical record. These guys are in power. These guys are looking for positions of power. They're not the janitor. They're not the guy who you're working with, who you just dislike, who you think is this kind of maniacal figure at your job. These are people who look at war plans. These are people who kill other human beings. These are people who create plans and pretexts and causes and come up with ways in order to accomplish their objectives. It's not the same level of people. You can't look at these people in the same way that you look at Bob at work. They have a different view of the world than you do. Let's let him finish. He's almost done.
Jose Mourinho, who's on board to be one of RT's special World Cup hosts, is now coming under pressure to refuse the job. Why do you think sport and politics are being merged together here, and why?
Well, if you think back to the Moscow Olympics back, it was 1970s or 80s, I can't remember now. I think it was 1980 or 84, I can't remember. But we were told, our athletes shouldn't be going there. But young men like Seb Coe, who now heads the International Olympic Organisation, they all refused to become part of that politics. They were determined to go, and they did go. And I think, frankly, our athletes should be free, our footballers should be free to go and take part in this. It's not politics.
The nerve agent used in the poisoning, Novichok, it could, in theory, be produced by anyone. As everyone's been saying, the composition of this nerve agent is no secret. Do you think, again, that other players have prematurely been ruled out, or at this point, too soon?
Oh, undoubtedly. Literally, the police, and I was responsible for policing in London for 8 years, are very good, very disciplined at actually finding out the facts on something like this, but it will take many days, if not many weeks, before we can have a very good idea about who might have been involved and so on. And if it turns out some Russian officials were behind this, then we should seek their extradition, we should put them on trial. But the simple fact is, yes, the world is awash with dangerous weapons like this, and literally the chaos under Yeltsin's regime, I wouldn't be at all surprised. Back in the 90s, a lot of this stuff was sold to in other countries.
And the Russian embassy in the UK has called the measures unfounded. Something you would agree.
By the way, he's making a good point. They're assuming that this stuff comes from Russia. They don't know that. They don't know that. Those chemicals could have been sold. Other people could have got their hands on those chemicals. And we don't even know if it's what they say it is. All of this stuff is going purely on the word of Theresa May. Let's let him finish. She's almost finished. It's almost done.
Agree with?
As I said at the beginning, this might all turn out to be true, and if so, it would have been a disgraceful act on the part of Russia. But I don't think we should be announcing and condemning people until we have some evidence and some truth in all of this. As I said, all my life in politics, I've watched governments all around the world do pretty terrible and unpleasant things, and also lie to their own people about it.
Just 24.
By the way, that's a sane and rational perspective. That's perfectly sane. Did Russia do it? Maybe. I don't know. But I've seen governments around the world do some really nasty and despicable things to their citizens and lie about it. So I am skeptical of the government. That is absolutely sane. Like, that is perspective of that should be the perspective of any newsman who's in this process, who's looking at the story, who's looking at any story. Absolutely sane. Radical sanity. That's what I'm going to call that. Radical sanity. Let's keep going. He's almost done.
4 hours ago, no less, UK counter-terror police said they are yet to declare any suspects. And now we have British politicians insistent that Russia was responsible for the poisoning. Is there any case where police would not relay their findings to the public?
Oh no, the police will produce their report, the government will have it. I think it would be completely impossible for the government not to publish that and have a serious debate about it. But I would be very surprised if it did identify simply who was behind this. It's going to be very difficult. And it could be many. I mean, when I was elected to Parliament 30 years ago, the first speech I made, I exposed the fact that a British army captain had taken rogue men over the border into the Republic of Ireland to murder the most popular rock band in Ireland at the time, the Miami Show Band, in order to undermine the then Labour government that was trying to do a peace deal with the IRA. So it could be acts by a rogue element, no doubt about that. But I would find it very odd to think that the president of Russia is sitting in his office deciding who to kill, someone who is no threat any longer, basically now retired in Britain. I would have guessed that Mr. Putin's got more important things to do than that.
That is an amazing story. Did you hear what he said? That the part of elements of the government of Britain, or a military commander, had hired a squad in order to go and murder a rock band in Ireland because they were one of the most popular rock bands, in order to cripple the Labour government in that country. That is amazing. That is amazing. That is amazing. That is fucking amazing. Yes, governments do some pretty despicable and horrible things, especially when those governments are faced with problems that they don't necessarily have a domestic answer for. They don't have a domestic answer for Ireland. Hey, Theresa May, What is the border issue? How are you going to solve the border? Are you going to have a hard border with Ireland? How are you going to do that? And maintain the support of the DUP? And be specific. Don't give me these platitudes and don't give me the Narnia policy. Be specific. How do you handle the hard border with Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? I don't know who caused the poisoning. The only point I'm making here is look for evidence. Be skeptical. And look for incentives. Who has an incentive to do what and why? You have to weigh all of these things, and you shouldn't necessarily just take the government's word for it. That's my only point. I wanted to show you what the other side of this was saying, because I feel like you guys are being inundated with purely accusations and Russia did this, Russia did that, and this is what the British government says. Well, this is a little bit more well-rounded point of view of what's taking place, at least from the other side or the other perspective of this particular event. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We didn't go into Libya in order to save the Libyans. There was no chemical attack, or at the very least, that chemical attack that took place was not from the Syrian government. They manufacture consent for the things that they do. Be skeptical and be aware that they do this. If the precedent was set once, then you know it could happen again. Be skeptical. That's my only point. So I'm going to end this. I'm not going to keep this one long. Like I said, I was going to keep this one blisteringly quick. It was not necessarily as blisteringly quick as I wanted to do, but nevertheless, I'm going to end it here. Guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thank you, everyone.